Welcome to the Myself Wellness Podcast. I'm Charles Patti, the voice of Myself Wellness, along with my co-hosts Christina Thomas and Jamie Veneziale. 9 years ago, I began my journey to self-awareness and healing. Like many who have faced personal struggles, I felt lost and struggled to find lasting healing. It wasn't until I discovered alternative healing methods that I began to see a real change in my life. This show will help you unlock your true potential through healthy lifestyle practices and transformations. Join us as we explore personal stories, expert advice, and practical tips to help you step into your true potential and level up. Welcome to the Myself Wellness Podcast.
How long have you been writing for, and when you started writing, when did the passion for what you're writing about now kind of kick up? I'd be interested to start there.
I wrote an article where I interviewed Tommy Chong, and my editor was like, wow, you really seem to like this cannabis stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm into it for sure. And he kind of gave me an opportunity. He asked me, this was on the cusp of Canada legalizing cannabis. And he was like, do you want to focus on the subject matter? Just write about weed only. And I was like, yeah, let's go. So I started out with that. And that was around the time that this sort of secondary psychedelic renaissance, if you want to call it that, was starting to emerge. So I started out with cannabis, and then I gradually began to focus on psychedelics. And yeah, that's sort of how I've ended up where I am now. I have sort of taken a little bit of a pause on the writing to pursue a few other things, but it's still something that's always in my wheelhouse. Right now, I'm just writing for myself on Substack, which is a nice change from the hustle, the nonstop go of writing about things like public markets related to psychedelics. That was never my favorite thing to write about anyway, in that regard. But that was sort of how I got my entry. Cannabis was, I guess, the gateway, if you will, to writing about other plant medicines and psychedelics.
What made you so passionate about this field?
That's a great question. I love this question. And I actually haven't talked about this in a long time, but I've been very open about it in the past. My own healing journey, honestly, in late 2017, early 2018, I was diagnosed with PTSD and severe depression. And I was really kind of at the end of my rope, like, thinking about not being here, thinking about what would happen if I drove my car into oncoming traffic, what would happen if I, did this, did that. It was not a good time in my life. And I was lucky at that time to have a doctor who was very supportive and okay with the fact that I was not keen on using antidepressants. I just know through experiences in my family with some family members who've been on SSRIs before that it didn't feel like it was going to work very well for me. I had tried them in the past and was a little bit like, I'm a little bit apprehensive about this. And so I went on the internet and I found everything I could about microdosing, information-wise. And then I went to my physician with like a stack of papers and studies and recommendations. A bunch of stuff by Dr. Jim Fadiman was in there. And I was like, listen, here's some information. Like, this is kind of what I'm thinking of pursuing as a way to help me out of this. And he was very pragmatic about it. He's like, oh, I've actually read a few of the Johns Hopkins studies about psilocybin and end of life. So, I'm going to read these, come back and see me in 6 weeks and we'll see where you're at. And just having that permission from someone in this like crazy medical field that can sometimes be very confusing was like, okay, I felt all right to go ahead and do that. And, I'm very lucky to have had that experience. I know that for most people, that's not the case. Your doctor would probably be like, get out of here. I don't want to hear about that, or that's illegal or what have you. But that sort of like set me on the path of learning more about psychedelics, about using them in bigger doses in ceremonial settings. And I worked with several different medicines. Psilocybin was a key one. I worked with ayahuasca, and eventually really was able to come out of those mental health issues, those diagnoses. I feel so far removed from the person who was dealing with all of those situations. I've been lucky to have really great support along the way. And I think the last really profound medicine experience that I had was in the spring of 2022. I did Ibogaine in Mexico at a place called Beyond. And I haven't really had any desire to do any sort of big psychedelic experience since then. It's sort of put me on the path that I'm on now, expanding beyond the psychedelic space a little bit. And I'm just really grateful. Like, I'm so lucky that I have this story, that I've, found this path that works for me, that I have all the support. And, part of being a journalist is going down those rabbit holes and really seeking out that information. And I think having that desire really supported me on my journey. I was like very hungry for information when I started sort of figuring that out for myself. So, yeah.
I'd love to get your perspective on the difference between micro and macro. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion in this field of what's right, what's wrong. Everybody has their idea of like the way to start. What did microdosing do for you? Because I was also looking at cannabis, not that it's the same experience, but it's similar in terms of the dosage, in terms of the use case. In a lot of cases, it's more little hits here and there versus these macro experiences. What was the catalyst for you when you started microdosing, where you started to feel that relief? And if you could explain that kind of presence of where your mind was and then where your mind went.
This is also like one of my favorite questions to answer. I remember vividly, it actually happened in the living room that I'm sitting in right now talking to you. So I had started microdosing, and I remember, like, I think it might have been the first day that I started, and I took the day off. In fact, I think I was like away from work at this time, just like so burnt out, couldn't function, was like very, like I said, like at the end of my rope, like, and I was sitting here in my living room trying to take stock of like what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body. And the first thing that I noticed was that inner critic that had been talking to me nonstop, like, hey, you're a piece of crap, you're no good, you're so depressed, you should just get out of here, like you don't deserve to live, all of these things, the volume on that just went way down. And I was able to have thoughts about myself that were not this like constant negative loop. It really like allowed me to sort of, when you play with an equalizer, it was sort of like I was able to turn down the volume on the inner critic and listen to the other parts of me that had been seeking for help. And that was really key. I think sometimes when you're depressed or dealing with any sort of like serious mental health issue, those thoughts can become so overwhelming. You start to believe them on a loop, right? It's this like, the spiral almost that can be really hard to get out of. And so for me, that's what microdosing did. It enabled me to sort of like tap into that other side of my brain. And when I took a macro dose, it was sort of like a even bigger version of that. Like the inner critic was kind of like sitting over here by himself or herself. And I was able to explore everything else that was going on in my brain in a way that was like open and curious, non-judgmental, again, because that critic was like out of the way a little bit. So that's kind of how I would explain how it impacted me, starting with the micro and then moving on to the macro.
It's not a one size fits all, but recently I actually experienced the microdose, and what the thing that I noticed was the breaking of the loop. So you're going through this constant mental loop of, oh, I feel this certain way, or I have this certain anxiety trigger. And in a lot of cases, like, and a great example of this is, I was leaving for a flight and there was bad weather. And so how my brain works is I try to solve all these problems as quickly as possible. And then I start trying to plan for the unpredictable. Okay, the weather's here. I'm going to start looking at flights just in case the weather doesn't pan out and I have to change it. And it's this constant loop where I'm going on the weather, checking more flights. And if the reality is there was nothing that I could take in terms of immediate action. But for me, being able to break that loop was one of the first times that I experienced it. The other thing I wanted to kind of get into on a macro dosing side, my understanding, it's this meditative state where a lot of people, when they, monks, for example, when they go through these deep meditative states, they get similar effects that macrodosing has. But Could you explain that meditative side of where most people can't even have a second of peace? They can't actually get themselves to a second of getting out of some of these loops. What was it for you when you finally broke free from that and got that major meditative experience?
Totally. I think that ability to let go, like that story that you just shared, is so relatable on so many levels. I can replay like 1,000 stories in my mind that are exactly that situation. And really what it comes down to is just doing exactly what you did, like recognizing like this is out of my control. I need to just let it go, roll with the situation, see what happens. Like maybe something interesting can come out of this. So when we talk about that sort of like meditative state, that peace that can come with a macrodose, and honestly, I would say that the goal for me throughout my life in these past couple of years since I began using psychedelics intentionally has been to sort of cultivate that meditative state, that sense, that presence every day, whether I'm using psychedelics or not. And so I think in the macrodose situation, the first time I experienced that was like overwhelming. It was like, oh, wow, this is available to me, just learning, like after having been depressed for so long, that feeling was there, that I could come to that feeling in multiple ways. And at the time, I was under the impression that, oh, like I can only get to this feeling by way of drugs. But as you mentioned it yourself, monks, people who meditate all the time, they're able to reach that state. I find I get there through exercise, through physical activity. And so I think the macro dose for me, especially that initial one, was really just about learning, like, oh, this is the spectrum of experience for me. I don't have to stay in this zone where I'm like either really sad or like mediocre. I can expand beyond that. And obviously within that, right, once you open Pandora's box, you're feeling all of the emotions. You're feeling the extreme happiness, and you're also aware and in contact with the other end of the spectrum. But I think that's part of it, right? Like part of letting go is acknowledging that there are some things that you can't control. And I think being open and curious is really this skill that I was able to gain through like experiences with macrodosing, recognizing that not everything is in my control. Because the worst thing in a psychedelic trip is when you try and control it, right?
Christina, what do you think about macro or microdosing?
Something for everybody. I mean, you got to meet people where they are, and there is no controlling it. So if you're not ready to give up that control, then it's not going to be a very comfortable experience.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, it's weird. It's like I was like always the overachiever, and I was just such a deep diver that I don't know. Like I operate I understand that microdosing puts people in flow state and it has some major antidepressant effects to it. So like I'm a fan of whatever works for anybody, but I noticed like when I would take like a small dose of psilocybin, it would really like, I don't know, it would just make me feel altered, and like it didn't put me in a flow state. It like kind of like threw me off a little bit. So I was just one of those like, I'm going to take an extremely large dose and go deep within and retrieve the information from the ethers and then come back and ground myself and kind of like try to figure out how to apply all of the information I got back to my life.
I don't think you took enough to be in flow state. Like that time I was just laying under that palm tree was probably one of the most relaxing times of my life.
Christina's talking about a time where she thought she took a microdose, but it wasn't exactly.
No, not that time.
No.
There was a time when I just laid under a palm tree and I just watched it for like 2 hours, and it was beautiful. But yeah, it was definitely flow state, because I don't know, I could have just literally, I felt like I could lay there all day and just enjoy the wind and the palm tree and just be.
So I have a question. So like you're in Canada. And like, what exactly, like, I'm not 100% sure of, I know that things are definitely decriminalized there per se, right? Or like, what are the actual legalities? Because like, I know that you can pretty much go to a corner store and buy psychedelics.
Totally. So it's, I'll clarify a couple of things. It's not necessarily decriminalized, but what you can do in Canada, if you have a medical condition, you can, with the help of your physician, apply to use psilocybin in a therapeutic way. This has been starting up recent, like I think within the last couple of years. A few weeks ago, there was a story about a man in Calgary who had cluster headaches, who had applied with his physician, and Health Canada denied him. And then after much uproar, I think they went back and actually did, in fact, grant him the access, the ability to use psilocybin. So in that sense, there is definitely a path to using it legally. It's still up to you to actually, it's changing all the time. Like, I think at one point it was up to you to obtain your own psilocybin. Now there are different suppliers, obviously licensed legal suppliers, who are involved in producing psilocybin for studies and that kind of thing. But on the regarding the corner store, pardon me. So not necessarily like your bodega corner store, but if you go to downtown Vancouver, there's probably, I would say, about 12, maybe more stores that are dedicated to selling psilocybin and psilocybin products. In fact, one of them, my favorite one, has all sorts of psychedelic products. It's not just psilocybin. I think you can get like LSD, microdosing, like drops, like liquid drops. I've seen different cacti in there, psychedelic cacti. It's definitely like a little bit more pushing the envelope, if you will. But it's not like that across the country. I know that Ontario, in Toronto, there's a couple of stores, but it's, similar to the States, province by province. Things are a little bit different. So yeah, it's, I would say, quite open and accepted, but still very much, illegal, I guess. You would have to go through a medical pathway if you wanted to pursue psilocybin. But if we look at the States, you've got like Oakland and other cities where things have been decriminalized. I think that's happening in some cities around Canada, but again, not a broad sweep. It's not decriminalized across the country.
Obviously, we're a pro psychedelic show for obvious reasons, but understanding that, I definitely would be remiss without having access where you can walk into a store and kind of have your pick of the litter by the sounds of it. There's obviously some risk factors associated with this. Like, what I've learned from Christina and Charles a lot is the therapeutic side of this comes through the integration, the preparation, the people that you're around. Actually, we just posted something yesterday talking about the idea of being around people that are, when you're going on these journeys, being around people of light and making sure that you're not throwing yourself too off kilter. Can you explain some of the risk factors to the people that are saying, hey, I want to experience this, I want to go do this, but I'm going to do it kind of with therapy in mind, but in a recreational context where there isn't the controlled aspects of putting the walls around you to be able to make sure that you're getting the most out of the experience?
Totally. So I think there's definitely value in having different kind of psychedelic experiences. But if you're in a situation where your mental health is suffering, that having that intention and that focus is really key. And I would say having some sort of support is absolutely necessary. Like, it's a non-negotiable. Like, you should, before you even get on the path of taking a psychedelic, make sure that you have somebody in your life that you can talk to about these situations, that you can bounce ideas off of, because the reality is not everybody in your life is going to be open to the idea. In fact, what people often find is that they'll go and do a psychedelic experience. Maybe they'll do ayahuasca in Peru or something, or they'll go down to Mexico and do ibogaine, and then they come back home and they want to share this magical experience with everyone in their life. But not very many people have the context and the frame of reference. They might get weirded out. That might make that person feel like misunderstood or like they did something wrong. And that's the last feeling that you want to be experiencing when you're trying to integrate, this magical, healing, profound psychedelic experience that you've just had. So I would say working with somebody who has that familiarity is key. Like, if you're decided that you don't want to do therapy along with doing like a recreational or whatever healing experience, I would say that having somebody like a coach, having at least one individual in your life that you can, preferably a community, that you can talk with about your experience. But the value of having a therapist, or like I really enjoy the group setting, like being in ceremony with people and having multiple individuals around you who are all going through the same thing, the experience of integrating afterwards and talking about what you went through can be so valuable for people. So I would say, if therapy is not in the cards for you, if it's not available to you, if you're not interested in therapy, do take care to ensure that you've got a touch point, some sort of support to help you integrate, because that's the worst thing, when you've like done this very intentional, profound experience, and then you want to integrate, you want to talk about your experience, and you feel like you have nowhere to go. Luckily, these days we've got like lots of great online communities and different integration groups and options for people. But I would say, yeah, if that's not a part of your plan going into a psychedelic trip, it should be.
I experienced that, like 10 years ago, where it's just like you have one of the most profound breakthrough psychedelic experiences that's completely mind-blowing and life-changing. And then you come back from the experience and it's just like, I need to tell everybody about this. And then everybody thinks you're crazy, and they think that you're just taking drugs, and that it's just like, like completely sounds nuts. And I found myself after a breakthrough experience just watching The Spirit Molecule on repeat, basically, by Rick Strassman, because it was the only way that I could make sense of what happened to me without everybody thinking I was crazy. And so like I suggest that like you just said, like anybody that's doing this kind of thing, make sure that you have a network of people that you can really have to process and integrate these experiences, and it'll help ground you. Because if you just gonna go like willy-nilly about this and take a macrodose and don't have a good support system and people to actually help you talk through everything, it can be like incredibly beneficial for you, or it could be like it could be the complete opposite. Because I know that like if I wasn't a very mentally strong person after my experience like that, it could have really thrown me for a loop and like made me question reality. And like I can see how people might end up, having some serious issues if they didn't have people to actually be there for them through the process of something like this.
Well, I think it's people that understand medicine and psychedelic experience. You can't just go to somebody who is totally closed-minded and doesn't have that type of experience. I mean, we see it all the time with therapists that don't understand, or psychiatrists that don't understand, and they're telling people don't do this, like, because they don't understand the medicine and they can't integrate it properly. You have to have a team of people that understand psychedelic therapy, understand these mystical kind of experiences, because that's what happened to you. You had all of these people that you told, they all thought you were crazy. Well, it's because none of them did it before.
Yeah. I think that, like with what Christina just touched on is like, we work with like, I mean, at our clinic, we have 2 integration specialists, and they're not therapists. And a lot of people will come in and they'll be like, well, who's the therapist I'm going to work with after this? And I'm like, I'm just going to be completely honest when I say this, and that I actually feel that in this field, sometimes it's not as important for somebody to have the letters behind their name as it is for them to have the personal experience and really have been educated in psychedelic integration rather than just typical talk therapy. Because you got guys like Rogan, who I love this analogy, and he said it like, about DMT, where he's like, trying to explain a DMT breakthrough to somebody is like trying to explain, that's never done it, is like trying to explain what a kaleidoscope looks like to a blind person. It's like,
Great analogy.
You're just never going to be able to really articulate it properly or be there to support somebody properly. I mean, people can have really good intentions, and I'm not saying that therapists can't work with people, but the truth is that, like, it's different when somebody's been there and walked the walk. And then if you know that the person that's integrating you has been in those realms before also, I feel like it gives people the ability to really let their guard down. Like, listen, like at our facility, sometimes people come out of their treatments and they're like, so I was just on a ship, and there was these beings there or whatever and stuff like that. And like for somebody to be like, listen, it's perfectly normal to have that kind of experience. And I've had similar experiences to that too. And it really lets people feel supported and comfort, and they can really integrate properly, where when you say something to somebody that might sound completely crazy to certain people, and you see that first micro expression on their face, no matter how supportive they are after you see the micro expression, it shuts people down instantly. Or like, and like that's why, it's not mandatory for everybody that works at our clinic to have done the treatments, but I mean, like, we probably would have a harder time hiring somebody that wasn't open to doing it, because this is just such a specialized field, I feel.
Talking about losing a little bit of a grip of reality, that's what I think a lot of people are scared of, myself included. You have this profound experience that people talk about, and if it weren't for people like you that can walk you through what that feels like, a lot of people, their whole idea of what reality was and what it actually is so shifted to the point, if you don't have anybody to bounce off that, you could start to feel actually crazy, and it could end up putting you in a feeling of like, oh, I am even more isolated now than I was previously with my mental health, because now I don't even have a sounding board of like what I just experienced. If you could look at everything that's happened in this kind of new age psychedelic revolution that I think we're currently in, when you look at being in the position that you're in, that you have a Western medicine where in a lot of cases, if it's not just looking at the substance itself, what are the effects of the substance? What is the positives? What are the negatives? When you have the Western side and you have the Eastern side that are kind of, I don't want to say they're butting heads, but I'd say that for the most part, they butt heads quite frequently. Where are you in terms of education through your writing, able to kind of bridge that gap?
I love this question. I think that's definitely one of the most challenging parts of this work is everybody has different opinions on how these medicines should be used, what settings they should be used in, whether or not, as you pointed out, Charles, whether or not somebody should have letters behind their name in order to facilitate. These two things are sometimes in conflict with one another. And I think my role as a journalist is to not really have an opinion, but to present the opinions of these different folks, different people who are representing different schools of thought, different ideas, different cultures. And what's been really interesting for me is just to like listen to these different voices totally. And like I mentioned earlier, this idea of being open and curious. I think psychedelics have been really helpful for me in that respect, and just being able to sort of have a non-judgmental view of these different opinions and perspectives, being able to share them with the world has been a large part of what I do. And in fact, when I wrote my book, Psyched, what I tried to do was really present not just opinions, but experiences from people who have these sort of different ideas about how psychedelics should be used. And I think bringing those two things together, recognizing that, it's not like two opposing sides, but a Venn diagram. There is some stuff in the middle that everybody seems to agree on. And I think, highlighting that, but also recognizing that, like, we're never all going to come to a universal agreement and understanding. There's never going to be one way. There is a spectrum of use. You can go to the jungle and sit with a shaman, and you can go to a medical office and have eye shades and headphones on and sit with a therapist. And there's a million different experiences in between. People love to take psychedelics at music festivals. And, I'm sure there are therapeutic group settings that are a little bit closer to the one-on-one medical instance, the example I just gave. And I think it's key to sort of like allow that, to not be like, oh, well, you should be doing it this way, or you should be doing it that way. Like the way we were talking about microdosing and macrodosing, like there's something for everybody. And so for me, it's been exciting to sort of, just like sit on these different thoughts, think about them, share them with people, have these discussions. I love being able to go to a conference like Cannabis and have conversations with people about how they experience the medicine, what they think is missing from the realm, because, I mentioned earlier, it does feel like a bit of an echo chamber sometimes. And so I think I welcome every perspective and do my best, to to sort of not represent, but to present them in a way that is, honest and is in line with, where these people are really coming from.
Where is that common thread? You talked about the Venn diagram. I think it's funny because I look at how I'm starting to understand psychedelics is how I started to understand Christianity when I was younger, because I went to a non-denominational Christian church, and that was like kind of like everything goes. Like there's a concert to start everything off, and then you have, a very like, I guess, progressive in the sense of like it's not as traditional in terms of the way that the pastor goes about delivering the message, much more motivational than it is, by the books, I guess. And then when you look at the psychedelic space, you kind of see very similar breakoffs. So like in Christianity, you have Episcopalian, you have Methodist, you have Baptist, you have all these different sects, and everybody has their opinion on why one is better than the other. So when you look at psychedelics, as in Christianity, the common thread in Christianity, it is, Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. He died for our sins. If you accept him as your Lord and Savior, you'll go to heaven. That was like the one common thread that everybody had the same opinion on. What do you think that is in the psychedelic space?
Ooh, this is such a juicy question. And for the record, I love talking about Christianity and psychedelics, the ways that they overlap. So I think it's so cool the way that you frame this question. I think universally, the thing that's in the Venn diagram, I feel pretty confident in saying this, that people who are on either side of the conversation, everybody agrees. I feel like there's no asterisk here, that psychedelics should really be used for the highest good. Like if you're taking a psychedelic, you're doing that because you are hoping for the best possible outcome and you're open to the best possible outcome, whatever that might be. And I think that's, that's something that I write in my book. It's the first page in the introduction, like, may all of this be for the highest good. And I think that's something that's really key to keep in mind, because sometimes what we want in life isn't necessarily for the highest good of yourself, of people in your life, whatever. And so I think whether you're more medical, if you come from this more medical framework or understanding of psychedelics, or you have, really deep cultural connection to psychedelics, I think that's something that should be sort of top of mind for everybody, whether you're on either side of the conversation. Yeah.
I wish that there was more people that were writing like you, because I feel like there's just so many people on one side of the spectrum or the other. There's nobody really bringing them together and showing the good and the bad, the benefits and the cons. I just read this article yesterday. It was a total hit piece on ketamine. And it's just really sad because they interviewed one person who didn't get the best results. I don't know really what happened or what the real story was, but they just completely bashed ketamine. And it wasn't because she had a bad experience. It was because it was expensive. It was like $3,000. And so because of that, and she didn't get the relief, it was in Women's Health magazine. They just totally crapped all over the whole entire industry. And it's sad because there are a lot of people who do get relief through ketamine therapy.
And the worst thing about the article is, like, I think that the girl actually did get relief from the ketamine. It was just like she had medical trauma because it was so expensive.
Yes.
Like, and so like they traumatized me because they charged me so much for this treatment that shouldn't be as expensive as it is. But like, running a ketamine clinic, we also know that like it's not cheap. Like everybody thinks that everybody's just cashing in on ketamine.
It's not one treatment for $3,000. Yeah. It's a set of treatments and a set of therapy.
No, but it's like, like between marketing and PR and your doctor and your nursing staff and your integration coaches, it's like, it's
being not in the clinic for 2+ hours.
Yeah, it's not a cheap thing to run. So like, listen, like I would love for it to be so much cheaper and hopefully insurance will end up covering it one day. But the truth is that like, I don't think anybody in the ketamine industry right now is completely just rolling in the dough. I think that everybody's like, are cashing out. I think that, everybody's really just, most people that are in this industry are very passionate about helping people.
Meanwhile, we just heard this person out in Oregon is charging $10,000 for one psilocybin experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks. You saw that on my face. Yeah, that's my reaction. I mean, I think probably my biggest critique, and this is not a critique, I guess, but like my biggest issue, whatever word you want to put there, with the MAPS protocol is that it requires two therapists to sit with one individual. Like, there's already a mental health crisis, at least in Canada, that I'm aware of, where most people who need counseling or therapy already don't have access to it because it's $180, $200 an hour. So then you multiply that by 6 hours in a psilocybin setting, if you will, and a second therapist. Like, it makes sense that it's very expensive. But I can see how, you know, people who are really desperate, maybe they've been on several medications and they're like ready for, you know, this period of depression or PTSD to be over. Yeah, it's a tricky situation, like making it accessible, but also recognizing that the people involved in doing this work need to get paid. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the recent news about the board voting on MDMA that's trying to go through FDA approval?
So I've been following this a little bit, and I think, I mean, I feel like I wasn't sure that I was expecting. I won't say that I was expecting them to say no. I mean, obviously there was that recommendation, and they were, you know, the idea was that it was going to be a no. I feel like it's something that perhaps needs a little bit more time. I'm sympathetic to people who have been working on this for a long time and who are really eager to get it out there. And I also recognize that, like, I don't know, do we need to do a couple of more studies? Like, do we need more data? Like, I'm kind of on the fence about the outcome, because I feel like there's so many things that still need to be done within the space to sort of make psychedelics more, you know, you were talking earlier about somebody being really against ketamine and saying, like, you shouldn't be, you know, selling this poison or what have you. And I think it might be, you know, if I really zoom out, it might be a little bit early for some people with MDMA. That being said, I can recognize how valuable it is for people who have used it in therapeutic contexts, particularly for veterans. And so I'm hoping that it's something that will be reconsidered or looked at in a different way. Maybe there's an opportunity for another country to step up and say, hey, you know what, we'll take on MDMA, we'll offer it, and perhaps there's, you know, a blueprint that the United States can pick up and put in place. But yeah, I think it's hard to say for me whether or not, like, is it the right decision at this point? Yeah, I don't know that I can give a clear answer. I feel like it's frustrating because there have been a lot of people working at it for a long time. There's some issues going on, and I think maybe those things kind of got in the way of that passing through. But I'd be curious, like, you know, as someone who's running a clinic offering ketamine, like, did that change things for you guys? How do you feel about MDMA? You know,
I think that MDMA is going to be so therapeutic for people, and I also think that when they came through and said that there wasn't enough data on the, like, liver toxicity that it might make happen, the truth is like, listen, if we're going down that avenue, you can go buy a bottle of vodka at every liquor, you know what I'm saying? And so it's like, so like, alcohol, which is incredibly liver toxic, is readily available for all of our veterans to go and drown themselves in, but we can't have something that 2 out of 3 people were cured of their PTSD from. It's like, so like 66.7% of the people that went through the MAPS studies had the PTSD diagnosis taken away from them. But like, so like, no matter how you look at it or what your belief is on how toxic it might be for somebody's liver, the truth is that you're talking about going in and doing a few sessions with MDMA. What about the guy who's drinking through a handle of vodka every single day? That's going to be way worse for him, and it's not going to make him any better, and because it's a Band-Aid. And listen, like, we were really excited, and we're still excited about the potential of being able to offer MDMA to our clients. I mean, and having insurance cover it, because the problem is that with ketamine, it's not covered by insurance. And then we end up getting yelled at by people that are very frustrated because they're like, you guys are all about the money and you just don't like care about people, even though, like, you know, Christina and I give away free treatments to as many people as we possibly can. But like, I think, and that's another thing too, is like I was on the phone, I was on a phone call with a congresswoman the other day, and she's fighting for the rescheduling of all of the different psychedelic compounds to get them taken off of Schedule 1, which I'm a fan of. But I'm like, well, listen, I'm a huge fan of your work and what you're trying to accomplish. And if there's any way I can support you, please let me know. And I'd love to be a part of this movement. That being said, we have an FDA approved medication that's already being able to be used in facilities, and we should be working on getting this covered by insurance because it's already FDA approved and it's Schedule 3. So like, can we have that conversation? And it wasn't a real conversation that she wanted to have. She was like, more like, well, that's much harder to do than get everything rescheduled and covered by insurance. And it's just kind of, that doesn't make any sense to me. It makes no sense. But back to your original question, like, I personally think that it's criminal. I think that it's a very unjust thing that they're putting all of these blocks up to prevent people from having a life-saving medicine. We're like, at the end of the day, if people don't want to do it, or if they think that there might be some health counterindications that would make them not safe using it, well, then it doesn't have to be an option for you.
You make a really good point. Yeah. I mean, think of all the different prescription drugs and even the foods that we eat that have side effects and things that we deal with all the time. And the point on alcohol stands. I'm in full agreement with you. You know, I think it's like it's a neurotoxin that is readily available to everybody at all times of the day, almost,
And
depending on where you
advertised.
live. And so,
Incredibly.
yeah, it's definitely problematic.
Or the fact that you can still go get, if you are in pain and your pain's too bad, I can go get oxycodone prescribed to me, or fentanyl patches, or all of these other things, which are actually causing a real epidemic within the community. And like, we're not talking about sending any of the, like, I'm not talking about sending MDMA or anything home with people. I'm just talking about having it available for people to use in a clinical setting. I think it's very, I don't know. I don't want to go down any rabbit holes here on the show, but I definitely
I love a good rabbit hole.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, it's like, hey, let's take away reoccurring revenue from pharmaceutical medications that people are going to have to take on a daily basis. And I think that's why ketamine's not being covered by insurance as well. I mean, listen, you know, we just got a Marine off 9 different medications through the process of his treatments. The most medications we've ever got somebody off was 11 different medications. And, you know, I remember, Christina, you want to talk about the video you made that day even? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
go
I
ahead.
made a TikTok and I just took some glitter and I threw it up in the air, and that's the only thing I did. But then in the caption I wrote, when a client tells you they got off 11 different medications through the process. And that was it. I didn't say we got them off 11 different medications. I didn't say anything bad. I didn't use any trigger words, and my TikTok got pulled down.
Yep. Yeah. Had to start a whole new page. Went from getting tons of views to that video had 6 views, and then basically nothing else got views after that.
The other frustrating
that's
side
so frustrating. I've tried TikTok too, and it's like, I think I posted 2 videos and I gave up because they just don't like it when you talk about drugs on TikTok. That's really frustrating, but also amazing that you're able to help. I mean, that this person was able to, you know, get off all of this medication. And I think, you know, really, now that we're going down this rabbit hole, I think that probably has a lot to do with why drugs like MDMA and ketamine are not being approved. You know, I host a podcast called Ibogaine Uncovered. Ibogaine is a magical, wonderful, very profound substance that comes from a root in Africa, and it can help you get off of opiates. But nobody knows about it and nobody talks about it because it would interrupt a massive revenue stream for a lot of these pharmaceutical companies. And so I try to be pragmatic about things like MDMA, but I'm definitely like questioning, you know, the things that are going on behind closed doors, the conversations that people don't see, the things that don't make it into written decisions or news releases or stories that impact why something might not be approved. Yeah, makes you wonder for sure.
Going back to the access to therapy, and something that I saw being in college, I see college in some ways as the front lines of mental health, because you see somebody going from high school athlete to hooked on alcohol, like basically building foundational habits around alcoholism, drug abuse, and it's glamorized to the sense where it's like, oh, this is what college is about. I was a part of student government during my time in college, and we had a sit down, and they were talking about all the things that they were doing with therapists and things like that. Right now at the school that I went to, there is a 3.5-month wait to be seen by a therapist on campus. So imagine you are struggling to the point where you're having questions of, am I supposed to be here? Would it be better if I was gone? Should I end my life? All these things coming up. And then all you're looking for is relief or somebody to talk to or something. And then you show up, and they say, okay, yep, we'll see you in 3.5 months. And that's the first time that you're even going to get somebody to talk to you. Not even start solving the problem. You're just literally starting that. I don't see a world where that's even accessible. But then you're talking about something like your experience, where you have an experience with microdosing psilocybin, and you're able to get almost immediate relief from your pain. And we talk to people about their experience with ketamine, literally going into the facility and saying, hey, if this doesn't work, I'm out of here. I'm just letting you know. And then all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3 treatments later, they're off all of their SSRIs. They're in a position where they feel like they have purpose again. And yet that is being absolutely destroyed in the media, but nobody's talking about the fact that with traditional talk therapy, number one, most people are having to go to multiple different therapists just to get somebody that they feel can understand them. And not to mention, in places like university, just getting there in something that's actually accessible, free, useful for the college students you're on a 3+ month wait.
Well, we have to block all of like when I do shorts and they make them, if I use any trigger words like ketamine or psilocybin or anything like that, the video gets no views. It gets no views. So now we've had to start bleeping things out and making X's through the words when they are posted out, when you can read the what I'm saying under me and stuff like that. And the thing is that listen, I'm not going to speak for anybody, but I think there's a very big chance that Mark Zuckerberg and all of these other people have tons of psychedelic experience. I would almost bet everything I own on it, right? So they're probably fans of the medicine, okay? But the thing is that their platforms are being sponsored and have tons of ad spend through pharmaceutical companies, where every other ad almost a lot of the time is going to be some sort of pharmaceutical, psych med or whatever and stuff like that. And so I almost feel like it's these pharma companies that are spending so much money on ad spend that are listen, we can't have this stuff being talked about because it's really bad for our business. And at the end of the day, it's the part of the machine where money keeps getting pumped into these things. And I mean, I don't even know what the answer is until the psychedelic industry becomes $1 trillion industry, and then all of a sudden there's more psychedelic ad spend money than there is pharmaceutical ad spend money. I don't know.
Not to mention on TV. The only thing that's keeping cable alive right now, it's the big pharma. I think I looked at something, and it was 30 to 40% of all major TV companies that sell advertising is based around big pharma. So when you're talking about these people are spending billions and billions of dollars a year advertising on these platforms, why, if you're the TV industry, why would you go? Why would you try to shake that up? Because I mean, we already know cable's on its way out to begin with, and all it's going to take is one of these profound experiences breaking through and being able to actually help people to where an entire industry might collapse. So seeing it from that perspective, I can understand it, but I'd be interested, and more so a question for everybody, is there a world that we can see where we're going to be watching a Super Bowl commercial and we're going to see a ketamine ad or something like that to be able to start to break through?
That would be nice.
I would really hope that something like that would happen. I mean, let me tell you an interesting story. So in Canada, we can't advertise drugs on television. There's no ads for drugs on TV, but sometimes I get American TV channels. When I was a kid, I would watch PBS sometimes, and I would be blown away by the fact that an ad for a drug would come on, and 3/4 of the ad is this voiceover telling you about all the insane side effects that you might get, but here this drug is completely safe, and there's somebody, laughing and walking through a field of flowers or whatever. The ad, right?
Yes, I've said this exact same thing on the show before. I'm like, you got people running in fields and they're smiling and all of that, and then it's like, then the scroll pops up and it's like, may cause 50 things that could have the most negative side effects ever on.
May cause stroke, may cause heart attack, may cause weight gain, all these different things, right? And I have a really hard time wrapping my mind around why we can't have an advertisement for something like ketamine to be used in the context that you're using it in, when we're already advertising all these drugs that have side effects. Like, why could we not have an ad for ketamine where we, it's still going to have the disclaimers, that's still part of the regulation, but it doesn't make sense to me that a drug that, like you said, is already Schedule 3. When I was talking to different doctors for my book, the chapter on ketamine specifically was really fun to write, because I was having a doctor tell me, oh yeah, my first time in a hospital after my residency, like ketamine was the first drug I gave to somebody, and it was for a child who was getting stitches. So you say the word ketamine and people are like, oh, they have this like fear around it, but actually it's one of the safest drugs. It's on I can't remember that, but there's a name of a global list of drugs that are like, they need to be in every setting, every medical setting, because of their use.
The World Health Organization's top 10 most essential medications.
That is the one I was trying to think of. Thank you, Christina. So it is, a very powerful, very necessary substance to have. And I think I'm hoping that you're right, that we see that Super Bowl ad needs to happen.
So I want to pivot real quickly to your passion about BJJ, because I think that this is awesome, and listen, and then because we just had Ian McCall on the show recently too. Yeah, he's amazing. So tell me about your passion for BJJ and what you're up to, and then Ian was also talking about people using psilocybin and stuff like that to get into a flow state when they're actually out there performing these, when they're fighting and stuff like that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Totally. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a couple of years ago, so my partner, who has been training for longer than I have, got me into it. And at first I was very this is really intense. I'm not athletic. I'm not competitive. All these things I've been telling myself for years, because, as a woman, you're not supposed to be competitive. Anyway, scratch all of that. I've dove in head first to the sport. Really love it. I'm just a blue belt, but I'm competing regularly. And, I would say the number one lesson that I've learned from psychedelics, from using psychedelics and being in this realm, is that life is not really about chasing these peak states that we get through psychedelics. It's about trying to cultivate a sense of that in your day-to-day. And for me, I'm able to access that through jiu-jitsu, through moving my body. I've been able to connect with an amazing community through this sport. And really, it's changed how I think about everything, because it's the only thing in my life where I'm required to fail over and over and over and over again and just keep going. It's built sort of this sense of resilience and grittiness. At the gym, we say you got that dog in you that I didn't have before. My whole life I thought I wasn't athletic, and now I'm if I don't move my body at least once in the day, I'm antsy. It's become a necessity for me, and competing is just a lot of fun. I don't know, it's a really cool realm. I never thought that I would be like wrestling with people for fun. And really it is a lot of fun. I think it's the main reason that I do it. It keeps my mental health in good standing, and it's just so much fun. Yeah.
I just want everybody to know that's listening to this. I've seen some videos of Amanda out there, and she's badass. Heck yeah.
But it's, so you talked about at the beginning that there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all for mental health. There's really nothing. And even the best experience, you still have to follow that up with habits and things around you. And the thing that you mentioned was the habitual nature of moving your body every single day, and then the community. Both things that I think most people that are struggling with their mental health lack. If you look at veterans, for example, they're a part of this massive community, this massive brotherhood for so many years. And once they come back to the States, that is gone. That is completely gone. And you're not able to feel like you're a part of something. So when you look at the combination of psychedelic therapy mixed in with, and for me, it's running. Running is a huge thing for me, where I get community and I get that moving my body every single day. Is that, in your mind, something that should be not mandated, but more so more accepted, where, hey, you're going to do this and this is going to definitely positively impact your life, but let's make sure that we set you up with something, a community, some form of physical activity that's attainable for you to be able to integrate into your day-to-day?
Absolutely. So everything that you've just said is exactly why I've transitioned away from journalism for a little bit. I'm working as a personal trainer and a psychedelic integration coach. And the first thing that I tell people is like, do you have some sort of practice? Do you have something that you can do before and after your psychedelic experience that is going to help ground you, that is going to give you some space to think about what happened during your experience, to integrate the lessons that you've learned, to sit with the intentions that you had? And it doesn't have to be meditation or journaling. It can be a moving thing. It can be, man, during COVID, I just danced around my living room for hours a day, and that was my psychedelic integration. I think, you said not necessarily mandated, but I would say having some sort of moving practice, whether it's walking is great. Walking is so underrated. One of my favorite things to do before I write something or sit down for a big project is to go for a walk and just think it through. And I think it's such a valuable thing to people to do something with your body while you're integrating your experience and also preparing for it. There's just something about it that, like, when we take a psychedelic, you really feel in your body, you feel really dropped in. And I think being able to come back to that, you don't need to come back to that with a substance. You don't need to microdose to have that feeling. All you need to do is move your body. A lot of the chemicals that or a lot of the reactions that happen in our brain when we're taking psychedelics, they happen at a smaller level when we're moving our bodies. And so those same chemicals are available to you, just not in the massive doses that you might get when you're taking, 5 or 6 grams of psilocybin. But I advocate to everybody. I would advocate to everyone on the planet to develop some sort of moving practice. Make it part of your day. Try and sweat once a day. The peace that I have after moving my body is like, you can't compare it to anything else. And so I would love for people to experience that. My favorite thing as a personal trainer is when I work with a beginner and we finish our session and they're like, oh, I feel high. I'm like, yes, that's what we're going for. Yeah.
I listen, like that's I do like I was doing like a mile. I'm doing more like 2-mile run before I weight train pretty much 5 days a week lately. And like, it's like, not only does it like, it raises our vibrations, but I feel amazing after I lift. And then I finish off my lifts with like a 20-minute sauna session at the end of it. And if I didn't do that throughout my week, like if after 3 days, I've noticed if I couldn't get in, I start getting really squirrely and I can feel like a little bit of anxiety building up. And I noticed that my mental health will start to deteriorate. So it's like, the way I look at it now, because you have people that take, pharmaceutical medications on a daily basis for their mental health, going to the gym and getting out and moving around for me is my medication for my mental health.
I would totally agree with you. And now that it's the summertime, doing anything outside, oh man, don't go to the gym. Just go like throw a ball around outside, or I mean, go to the gym
Yeah.
if that's your thing. But yeah, if you can work
Yeah.
out outside, sunlight, it's a really, I don't know. It's summertime's a great time to start that physical habit. Yeah.
Well, this was a great episode.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you. And once again, I appreciate everything that you're doing out there now with helping people integrate from these profound experiences, and, just being a great spokesperson for, women to be empowered and get out there and do amazing things like BJJ and stuff like that. I mean, you're a strong woman, and you're making a huge, you have a strong voice for everybody out there. So it's an honor to know you and call you a friend.
One quick question before we jump off. I actually wanted to make sure that we covered this. Going from writing being a passion to then writing being a profession, and then writing going back to being a passion again, being on Substack. How has that journey been? Because I know when you're working for an organization and having to do creative things like writing, it can kind of lose its why you got into it to begin with. So how have you rediscovered the passion for writing now that you're writing independently?
I mean, I find with journalism, when I was working in that realm, and that was, my day to day, I very much got in this like habit where, I'd get up, I'd check the news, I'd write something, I'd check the news again, maybe I'd write something else. And it was just sort of this like flow that I was in that like was very hard for me to break out of. Sometimes I'm still like, I get up, I check the news, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not doing this anymore. And being able to sort of rediscover that passion that you're talking about, remembering why I like to write, not having like these like guidelines about what the story needs to be about and who it needs to mention. It's just like doing whatever I want. Wow, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to sort of be a little bit removed. Obviously, I see what's happening in the news, and with psychedelics, I'm still keeping up with everything. But I would say that just pulling myself away from a little bit has reminded me of that passion, that I can have fun with it, that it doesn't have to be this like intense thing with crazy deadlines. I wouldn't say that I've slacked lately, but I'm taking, I guess, a healthy break so that when I come back to it more regularly, and I do plan in the future, I think, to write another book, perhaps about this subject we're talking about, this integration of movement and psychedelics and profound healing. But for now, the passion is really in being with people. That was the main thing that I enjoyed about being a journalist, was like meeting with people, talking to them, taking their picture. And after COVID, all of that kind of went away, and everything just became this like online interaction. So I love what I can do now, talking to people, hanging out with them, and then just like writing for fun whenever I feel like it is.
Cool.
Where can people support your writing?
So my Substack is called A to Z of Altered States, and I post there occasionally, kind of sporadically, about exactly this, these different ways that we can alter our state, whether that's psychedelics, whether that's through movement, whether that's through breath work. So that's where you can find my writing. And then if you're interested in listening to the podcast, I host all about Ibogaine. That's on Spotify. It's called Ibogaine Uncovered.
What about any you want to drop your Instagram handle?
Sure. My Instagram handle is Amanda_Siebert, just my name. And the last thing I'll mention is these books. These are my books. This is the one that Charles, he was mentioning earlier, Psyched, that some party in LA. Thank you so much for coming to that. And then I've also written a book about cannabis. It's called The Little Book of Cannabis. 10 chapters that talks about how the plant can be used to improve your life. Yeah.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Can you get that on Amazon?
Yeah, you can get both of these books on Amazon, most major bookstores as well.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. We really appreciate you once again. And maybe we can do this again sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much.